Hi, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, as hundreds of migrants in Calais try to enter the UK through the Eurotunnel, the British government announced new measures to tackle illegal migration. So how is this impacting the country's already intense immigration debate? So we're going to tap into a conversation that's happening right now in the UK. Our digital producer Malika Bilal is seeing what's happening online. And what are you getting?
One of the interesting things is that people are debating, dare I say, even fighting with each other online about this, two opposing sides, and they're tagging the stream because they're letting us know what they think. This is how some of that debate looks like. Take a look at this tweet. This is from Joseph, who writes, "I think the climate is getting rather vicious and sinister around this. Awful dehumanizing rhetoric is jeopardizing a proper debate." So we'll attempt to have that proper debate today on the show. We want your help. Tweet us with #AJStream.
My name is Linda Sarsour. I'm a civil rights activist, and I'm in the stream.
Migrants in the French town of Calais continue to risk their lives trying to cross into the UK through the Channel Tunnel. And while migrants have long gathered in Calais, their numbers have grown from 600 to around 5,000 in recent months. The ongoing crisis has intensified an already sensitive topic in British politics: immigration. Under pressure to do something about the situation in Calais, Prime Minister David Cameron vowed to put more resources into preventing migrants from crossing over.
Well, the situation is not acceptable, and it is absolutely this government's priority to deal with it in every way we can. We've got people trying to illegally enter our country, and we're going to take action right across the board. Starting with helping the French on their side of the border, we're going to put in more fencing, more resources, more sniffer dog teams, more assistance in any way we can in terms of resources. Look, this is going to be a difficult issue right across the summer. I'll have a team of senior ministers who will be working to deal with it, and we rule nothing out in taking action to deal with this very serious problem.
So in addition to this, new measures announced by the British government require landlords to evict undocumented immigrants without a court order. Failing to do so or not checking the applicant's immigration status could result in landlords being fined or serving up to 5 years in jail. Prime Minister Cameron has warned that the Calais migrant crisis could last all summer. So what impact is it having on the immigration debate in the UK? To help us talk about this, we're joined by Don Flynn, Director of the Migrants' Rights Network, Stephen Wolfe, migration spokesman at the UK Independence Party, or UKIP, and also a member of the European Parliament. Jonathan Portes is Director of the National Institute of Economic and Social Research. And Larry Macaulay is the founder of the Refugee Radio Network. Gentlemen, good to have you all here. I'm going to start on my laptop. I want to show you a couple of extraordinary pictures here. Stowaways on a truck heading down through the Eurotunnel. Click one more here, you can get a better view of this. They obviously jumped off a high bridge to get onto the trucks, the lorries, risking their lives, and people have died. People are dying right now, Larry. You've been down to Calais, you've heard the stories. What's stuck in your mind?
Well, thanks for having the program, Femi. What I can say is that these migrants are determined, they're young, and they're really determined to cross over to the UK. It's one thing to cross over, it's one thing to be accepted in the United Kingdom, but their determination is so strong, and we've seen the population swell in the past few months. 1,000 people storming the Eurotunnel every day is quite huge.
Yeah.
I think the only way out is to really open the doors and let the government now start understanding why these people are coming in. I mean, you don't just shut yourself out and shut people out. Engage with them, meet with them, discuss with them, and find out why they are there. They are legitimate refugees. Most of them are coming from Syria, Afghanistan, and Eritrea.
Right.
So this is the issues on board.
Stephen, you engaged with a number of the migrants. You've visited several times in January, in June as well. Let me show people a little bit of a clip where you were talking in one of the squatter camps to migrants there, asking them why do they want to go to the UK? Have a listen to this.
Only England. For you, England. All of you want to go to England.
No.
Who wants to stay in France? Some want to stay in France.
Someone, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I think you go take paper 3 months. After 3 months, you take house.
In England? You think after 3 months you get a...
Here in France.
You have...
So, Stephen, I was looking at behind you, and people were making houses out of bits of wood and cardboard. What kind of conditions were they living in?
Well, the conditions that they live in are appalling. There's no doubt that anyone who goes over there cannot accept the fact that these people are trying to live there in plastic houses. They're building it out of wood, any waste that they can find. And what I found was obviously they've got places where they can have water, but they're having to carry it. There was one person trying to create a church for them to be in. But it's very clear these are not human conditions in which these people can live in.
Yeah.
And that is one of the problems that we have to face, is that whilst we've got a great deal of migration coming up now, and this is reflected by the large numbers that came across the Mediterranean, they're now beginning to reach Calais in the numbers that I projected they would do in December and then again in June.
Well, Don, when we talk about the conditions in Calais, we got this tweet from Hajar, who describes why people are facing some of these hardships. She says they're being denied asylum and economic opportunities in France due to stricter migration policy, and so they find an alternative in the UK. But when you ask, why is it, what is it about the UK that is drawing them there? This next person says, my thoughts are that the UK is a soft touch and that their only reason for coming here is for our benefit system. Don, what do you make of that comment?
I think we have to get it in proportion. You know, the UK is actually fairly down, some way down the list of preferred countries for asylum seekers, right away across Europe, where we only receive about 5% of asylum seekers coming here. There were figures released today about the most recent volume of asylum seekers, and even countries like Austria and Hungary and Italy are receiving more asylum applications than the UK is. I think the people at Calais, what you find when you have the opportunity to talk to them, is that they usually have surprisingly good reasons for wanting to come here. They have been abandoned. They've been pushed from pillar to post by the public authorities in the dozens of different countries that they've been in. And they're working on their own survival strategies. How best can they get by with the skills and talents they've got? And in most instances, the biggest skill and talent is that they speak English. And quite a number of them have got friends and relatives in this country who they can draw on for assistance. They seem to be perfectly rational reasons for wanting to choose the UK, and we ought to listen to them.
Jonathan, I checked back to see when people started dying in the Eurotunnel, and it's been going on for some time now. It's just that there's been an uptick on how many people are trying to actually get to the UK through the Eurotunnel. Why do you think this has actually happened now? What's going on?
Well, it's quite simple, and Don has set out the reason. It is largely because there are far more people coming across the Mediterranean. And really, frankly, the UK debate on this has been incredibly, depressingly self-centered and introverted. I thought, you showed the clip just now of the Prime Minister coming out onto the steps of Downing Street and saying what a terrible crisis this was and how what we need, the answer to it was more fences and more dogs. Frankly, that's demeaning that a British Prime Minister should have to do that about what is actually a few thousand people. As Dawn has said, we've seen nearly 200,000 people come across the Mediterranean so far this year. Of those, a few thousand have indeed ended up in Calais because they particularly want to come to the UK. And as Dawn says, that's because usually they have person-specific reasons, whether it's family or fluency in English, for wanting to come to the UK, but they are a small minority. This is a European crisis. The real crisis is going on in places like Messina in Italy, where yet more bodies were brought to the port today in Sicily, or even worse perhaps, in places like Kos and Lesvos in Greece, where a country that is already in the depths of the worst economic crisis through the Great Depression is having to cope with tens of thousands of migrants it has absolutely no capacity to deal with. Now, the UK has a choice from a policy point of view. We can either decide that we want to help solve a European crisis at a European level, or we can try and retreat back behind the channel, behind walls, behind borders, behind fences, behind sniffer dogs, and pretend that we can stop it at the channel. Now, that is an option. That's the option that Stephen wants. But we should not expect.
Hold on a minute, Jonathan. Let's just hear what Stephen wants rather than you speak for him. Stephen, is this a crisis for the UK and a crisis for the immigration debate in the UK?
Well, it is a crisis in terms of the UK. I disagree with Jonathan in some respects. There is much that I agree with. Where I fundamentally disagree with him is that he suggests it's a European problem. I don't. I believe it's an actual international problem. And one has to look at the reasons why we must look at this internationally. First of all, we've had international governments involved in regime change and wars. We have problems in relation to trade, where we have restrictive trade practices that make it difficult for African products to be sold into Europe, for example, without great tariffs. Internationally, we've been backing up and supporting dictators by funding them with foreign aid or being allowed them to exist. And so we've also created problems in these countries. And what I'm suggesting is that this isn't dealt with by Europe, that we must have an international convention where we pull together people to start looking at the solutions, not just in war and trade, but then also deal with where we distribute people. The reason why I'm so disagreeing with Jonathan, if I may for a moment, the reason why I disagree with Jonathan in terms of the numbers, it's, as I said, I've been there now since December and I'm going into June. We're getting about 1,000 a week coming through into the UK, according to the border agency staff. There may only be 5,000 there now. It's grown by, a couple of thousand since I was there in June. So the actual numbers are much larger than we're thinking, because many are getting through. Those who are there probably in June now are already in the UK. So you've got to look at it cumulatively. And why people in Britain are getting exhausted, I call it immigration fatigue, is because they're conflating asylum and immigration from people who genuinely come from suffering and pain with overall numbers we face in the UK over the past decade, which is mass migration from Europe and other parts of the world.
Okay, Malika.
Well, that idea of immigration fatigue is actually something people are talking about in their own words on how this is being talked about within the UK. So I want you all to have a listen to this video comment from Hamza, who's speaking to us out of the UK.
When you look at the statistics, very few people come to the UK to seek asylum compared to other European countries like Germany, Norway, Switzerland, etc. So this idea of a swarm of people, as David Cameron said, coming to the UK is just untrue and it's false. I think, we should be taking a much more humane approach. If countries like Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, Turkey, much poorer countries than us, can take in 4 million Syrian refugees, how is it that we can't even act humanely towards a few thousand refugees?
Larry, I saw you nodding your head there. That comment really picks up on this tweet I want to also show you before I get your response. When we asked what's missing from the conversations about this migrant crisis, Natalia on Twitter says compassion is missing. And so that goes along with that video comment from Hamza, who said this is a humanitarian issue. Larry?
It is. It is an humanitarian issue. And it's quite shocking that a political leader of one of the biggest countries in the world could use statements like that to characterize human beings. It's quite shocking for me. I mean, calling human beings names, swarms. I mean, it's quite humanizing. We need to show a humanitarian compassion. Italy and other European countries have stepped up to it. Germany is stepping up to it now. We've seen an improvement in the policies in the past few months. And I can assure you, the refugee cries will increase as time goes on. And it will increase until the governments in Europe agree and accept the cries of human beings crying for help. If they do not step up to it, the cries will increase much more louder. That's all I can say, because it's quite shocking. What the gentleman said from UKIP, it's quite shocking to me that they have such views. And we need to look at the trade barriers, the wars that have been fueled in Africa and in other continents of the world. That is why moving. I mean, there's no war if there's tranquility. Nobody wants to move to Europe to an hostile environment where nobody welcomes them. No, But the situation in Syria, the situation in Eritrea, the situation in Sudan, the situation in Boko Haram conflict zones in Nigeria is driving people to move. Nobody wants to wait and die. That's just simple. I will not wait and die in such conditions. I would rather move. And the destination that I'm moving to is yet unknown. I get to one point, nobody wants to accept me.
Can I just follow up on that?
Sorry?
Yeah, go ahead, Jonathan.
Yes, because I think a lot of what Stephen said I thought was absolutely sensible, and I agreed with a lot of it. The stuff about trade barriers, for instance, he's absolutely right. But I think he does have to either defend or back away from his policies here. The 4 million Syrian refugees that the person on the video clip talked about are not going to sit around and wait while Stephen convenes an international conference and hopefully solves the crisis in Syria. I'm not saying that's not a bad idea, not something that our government and other governments should be doing. But meanwhile, Stephen's party, as I understand it, wants to send the army to send to Calais to stop any of the Syrian refugees who are currently camped there from coming to the UK. If Stephen is prepared to say that at the same time as convening this conference, the UK could at least accept its fair share of the Syrian refugees who so far have made it to Europe, I think it would be much easier to take the rest of the policies that he set out seriously.
Let me show you something, Stephen, because I'm interested in what you might say to this gentleman here. This is a gentleman who went through the Calais tunnel and he ended up in the UK. Have a listen to his story.
There is a train station over there. When the train starts going on, then you are trying to catch the train. At that time, at the first time when I was new, when I catch the train was fast and fall on me. Then at that time I become like this.
So you fell off the train and you got those injuries?
In front of the train. Then after that, after 3 days, after I become like this, at the next time I tried, and at the next chance, I come here.
So Stephen, this gentleman, more than one attempt, finally got to the UK, stowing away on a train. What would you tell him? He was obviously desperate to be in the UK. What would you tell him?
Well, I would tell him, I'm sorry that he's had to have injuries to get to our country, but there is a legal process of getting to our country. But one has to be clear. When I was in the camp and speaking to people, when I was in the camp speaking to people,
Stephen, can you tell us what that legal process is? I'm fascinated as somebody who's been providing legal advice to migrants for close on 30 years. I would really appreciate knowing what are the proper procedures in which a refugee can gain access to this country, because as I understand the position, it simply doesn't exist.
Well, first and foremost, if he's in France, he can claim asylum in France, as you know. If he arrives in Italy, he can claim asylum in Italy. In Slovenia, in Hungary, Slovenia, Greece, and all the 5 major points that they're coming through, they have their first port of access, as you know, under international agreements, which they can actually claim asylum. The reason they don't.
All right, so gentlemen, one at a time. So Stephen, you threw out an idea there. Obviously, there's some debate to be had. Just pause for a moment. Larry, why are you unhappy with what Stephen just said?
What has the UK government done to support countries like Italy? Because it's giving reference to Italy and other Mediterranean countries who are stepping up to their responsibilities at this moment. What has the UK government done? UK was complacent in creating wars in Africa.
So Larry, stop there, because Stephen can only take so many questions at one time. Stephen, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'm fine to be able to try and answer half a dozen. Yeah. Well, to start off with, Larry, there is a European Union fund for asylum and migration, which currently has €3.1 billion euros in that. The UK's contribution to that is 18%, which is over 650 million euros. So there is a huge financial contribution going into that, and many organisations like are receiving funds from that. So there is a big financial contribution. And secondly, you cannot just blame the United Kingdom on the issues in Libya and Syria and Afghanistan. There are other countries that
blame them 100%.
No,
I blame them 100%. That's not true.
You cannot blame
when you were removing governments, when you were bombing Libya, you didn't think about the consequences of people coming in?
So we could all gentlemen, we could all play the blame game here, but it doesn't really make any difference to people who are camping out in appalling conditions in Calais right now. Hold tight for a moment, Malika. What do you have?
I want to give two kind of opposing views that I am seeing online. Some echo what Stephen said, others echo what our other guests are saying. This is Maggie, and she says, "Why don't we ask the French to give these people facilities that they require? Why not the first country that they landed in?" But then you get this response from Mark, and he says, actually, the government should introduce a welcome policy and recondition old abandoned properties so that people have actual dwellings to live in. So whose responsibility does that fall on? Don, I know that you're itching to get in here. Where should this focus lie? You're in the UK. Should this focus lie on the UK government?
Well, we need a European policy. These people come to Europe in the first instance. When they come here, they want to find out where best they can recover, where they can rebuild their lives after the terrible experiences they've gone through. Now, at the moment, and you know, Stephen says this, but it is simply not true. There is no legal channel by which a refugee can come to the United Kingdom. One has, of necessity, one has to use deception. One has to obtain false documents. One has to smuggle oneself in the back of a lorry of some sort, because this is the only way to get to the UK. And this is a situation we created, a completely irrational one, in which the refugees have no incentive whatsoever in order to cooperate with the authorities. They regard the authorities as a bunch of people who are basically attempting to cheat them out of their human rights, and we find ourselves in this predicament. They are doing the best they can in impossible circumstances.
But Larry, are you saying there won't be human rights in Italy or Greece or France? Are the only human rights that are available in the United Kingdom? Because I can tell you this, when I was actually in the camp speaking to people
they
there...
don't want to be in France or Italy. They have got very good
Let the gentleman tell me. Let the gentleman tell me.
Often they have family here.
But I'm sorry, you are not a refugee, so you cannot really tell me what I know, what I've experienced. So tell me, I'm listening.
Thank you, Larry. When I was actually speaking to the people in the camps there were many. I asked them, why do you not want to stay in Italy? And the response to that in Italy was that they felt that Italians were racist and they didn't have the ability to be able to bring their families there. In Germany, they gave a similar scenario, and they said after 3 years, they would not be able to bring their families. In France, they said they wouldn't get as good education as health. But in the UK, they gave about 6 to 7 reasons. The first of all, they said that they already had connections with either families or friends. Secondly, they felt that when they were able to get over there, they would be able to get jobs, whether illegally in the black economy or later on.
Stephen, I'm almost at the end of the show here, so I just want to ask you a quick question.
Oh, sorry.
Do you think most people in the UK don't want migrants to come and live in the UK? Are they upset with the pictures that they're seeing from Calais? Just a brief answer here.
Yes, I think they are upset. But as I mentioned early on, I think what we're getting is that people are fatigued about it because it's being conflated with the large-scale migration that we've got in work and over Europe over the past 10 years.
All right,
I think all of that is creating a problem.
Let me show the audience something, because we're talking about migrants and their voices are very important. So this is the extent of the problem. You can fall off a train, you can jump back on a train, you might die. It's not necessarily going to stop the migrants coming after. These are some migrants that Associated Press talked to just a few days ago. Have a listen to their determination to come to the UK.
In Syria, I live is very nice live in Syria, but here is very hard. But I need to go to England because in Syria, the war, big war, you know that. Go to England is very difficult, very difficult. I try every day, every night.
We will try to cross through the train, but it's more difficult for us, the police, security and the dogs, but we will try. We will try again and again until one day we'll have a chance.
Have a look here on my laptop. This is from a Guardian article that Dom Flynn, one of our guests, wrote a little earlier. It says, France is dog life, England good life. This conversation will be continued in our online post show at stream.aljazeera.com with Don, with Stephen, with Jonathan and Larry, and hopefully you. Thanks for watching. Hello, welcome back. This is the Streams Online Post Show. We've been talking about how the migrant crisis in Calais is impacting the immigration debate in the UK. I might add, an immigration debate that's been going on for decades and decades and decades. So, Larry, you have the voice of a lot of the migrants on your radio station. You're interacting with migrants. Can you see where there might be a way forward from this situation in Calais?
Like I said, Femi, the migrants, the refugees are here to stay. Let us just welcome them. Let's show humanity. Let's show solidarity towards them, because showing hostility towards a stranger, a visitor in your community, builds more hatred, and I don't want us to go in that direction. So all I can say is that the refugees and the migrants are here to stay. We should just embrace them and welcome them and tap into the vital potential that each individual has in order to build a productive society. That's all I have to say.
Jonathan, is that even realistic? Is that realistic?
Well, I think, frankly, that simply welcoming everybody is and opening the borders, as it were, is not realistic politically, economically, in the short term. But we can, I think, that we can combine a much more humane and yet at the same time more practical and feasible approach if European governments, including our own, could actually get our act together. That involves, as I say, the UK government accepting that it has some responsibility in this. We can't and we probably shouldn't take everybody who comes across the Mediterranean, but then, as Don says, only a small minority of those who come across the Mediterranean actually want to come here. What we could do is offer to help Italy, Greece, both to process migrants closer to where they land and, if possible, to start processing potential refugees in North Africa so that they're not obliged to make trips on dangerous boats across the Mediterranean, and start accepting something closer to our proportionate share. And I think if that combined over the medium to longer term with the sorts of policies to do with aid and trade and intervention that positive intervention that Stephen was talking, could over time make a positive difference. But it does mean turning our back on this failed approach of simply barbed wire and sniffer dogs, or indeed the going one better, as some in UKIP would like to do, and sending in the army to Calais, and actually recognising that this is a European problem, and if we want other governments to cooperate with us, we are going to have to do our share as well.
Jonathan, it looks like not everyone wants to turn their back on the dogs and the barbed wire. This is a tweet we got from Paul, and he says what needs to happen is we need to reassign more hands to police the tunnel and the Dover area. And then he got a response from Mark. This is one of those fights we were telling you about that are happening online. Mark says that strategy is racist and it's counterproductive, as refugees are economy builders and they bring social capital to communities. So Stephen, when you hear that, because Mark had some other tweets talking about the amount of capital that they could bring and the benefit that they could bring to the UK society, what's your response?
Well, I think we can have a bigger debate about actually the economics, and Jonathan and I have discussed this on many occasions. I think it's absolutely clear the UK accepted 30,000 asylum seekers who were granted asylum last year, but there's an unknown number. It's now estimated that there are 1 million illegal immigrants who are not yet gone through the process or are now hiding in our economy as a whole. And what we're also facing, and why I agree with Jonathan, it would make no economic sense, no practical sense to open the doors to open door migration on all fronts, because that would actually lead to a disaster. What we are told by the United Nations, that coming down from Turkey all the way through to Libya, there is approximately 1 million plus people willing to come across. If we opened our doors, then all you would see is more people coming through, and you're not solving the fundamental problems that I discussed early on about economics, trade, dealing with the recalcitrant and anti-democratic governments, all the war issues as well. There is an argument, as Jonathan is quite right, to deal with, is how we actually can distribute people across the world, in my view, because I believe it's an international problem, not just an EU problem. That is why I've made the proposals for an international convention. We could deal with it very quickly in the 1980s, if you remember, when we had Feed the World programs. That took a very big issue very quickly. I think if we took the nettle we'd be able to do something very similar again.
Stephen, let me ask you something as a politician, and be as candid as you can. I know you're a politician, so maybe you might not be able to be totally candid, but what is it about this issue and politics that the countries find so difficult? I suspect that behind closed doors, there'll be a lot of countries saying, look, we really need to get together and work this out. But for the electorate, it might not seem the most popular thing to do. What is it about this issue that is so tricky?
Well, I can't speak for other countries, but all I can say is that having campaigned now across the UK for 4 or 5 years, is what I'm finding is that people in Britain are genuinely welcoming to people to come across. As I say, I'm a mixed race person myself. My grandmother was Irish. I've got a black American and a grandfather and Jewish grandmother. So in that way, we've always accepted. There's a lot of boxes you're ticking there, Jonathan. I know, well, you know, and I'm Mancunian, so that helps. But,
all right, that's the most exotic of all of them.
But what I do find is that people are feeling a recession that's impacted them, and they're feeling wages that have gone down. They're feeling public services are difficult to deal with, getting into doctors' hospitals, etc. And that's because we've had large-scale migration in other areas. And I'm saying, until we can solve both of these, people are going to start feeling antagonistic towards genuine asylum seekers. And one thing I also found in France once I was there was quite a few people there who genuinely were there because they just wanted to come to work, which is a different category altogether.
Right. Don, this seems to me a conundrum. I mean, you've been working on this issue for many, many years. Is there a simple way to get out of the situation we're in right now? Is this always going to be an issue? People will always want to be somewhere where they can have a better life for their families. Don, what do you think?
Sorry, that was me?
Yeah.
Don?
Yeah, I know you're thinking very deeply there, Don. What, do you think this is always is there an easy way? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's not rocket science. It's Europe has actually managed to has furnished itself. Stephen talks about the need for an international convention. I mean, there actually is one. It was passed in 1951. It's called the Geneva Convention. It's got a 1966 protocol. On top of that, there's a vast amount of case law that's passed through the courts over the years. These are incredibly powerful instruments for addressing this issue. Immediately after the Second World War, when these instruments came into effect, there were 8 million refugees moving across Europe, 8 million refugees and displaced persons. And these humanitarian policies made a huge contribution to addressing these problems. In the 1950s with Hungary, there were huge movements of refugees from Eastern Europe into Western Europe, and these policies came to play. What's happened, I think, over the course of the past decade or so, and in fact, it wasn't UKIP in this instance. The people who began to raise this was the Labour government, who suddenly began to cast aspersions on all of these instruments and to say that they were outmoded and we needed new instruments, and they contributed themselves to a very, very negative discourse. They really failed to account to the British people exactly why it was that we were once again in an age of migration. Is that, things have become ridden with anxiety. People are sceptical, they're doubtful. All of the politicians, there are no politicians who consistently make the case to explain why it is we have become the country that they are. All that they can see in immigration is negative, dismal, pessimistic stories about it. And it's really left to civil society. Again, Stephen is right on that point. Actually, in lots of ways, this is a welcoming country. I live in London. I live in Woolwich, and this is a welcoming place. I walk out of my local tube station, and I am aware that I live in a diverse, multicultural part of town, in which there is a welcome for people from all over the world from here. We ought to be building on that instead of the pessimism and the anxiety that the politicians are encouraging.
Malika.
Hello. Jonathan, you said earlier that the answer to this, or one of the answers to this, would be for a European solution, not just a country-by-country solution. So I wanted to give you a taste of a tweet from the other side. This is from a French citizen, Ilian, who says, the feeling in France is that the UK is hiding behind fences that they're building on French territory without actually helping to resolve anything. And we know the Home Secretary, Theresa May, and her French counterpart recently wrote a letter talking about the world needing to come together and Europe needing to come together and do more. Do you think, as we head towards the end of the show here, do you think there's actually the beginning steps here for a European solution?
Well, I have to say that so far we've seen very little evidence that European leaders in general are prepared to, that they have the grasp or the vision or the political will to actually come up with any sort of coherent solution. Theresa May certainly isn't offering it. I certainly agree broadly with what your French viewer tweeted. I don't think the French are behaving particularly well in any of this either. The people I have to say I feel most sorry for are the Greeks, who have enough problems already with the ongoing economic crisis without this, and they've been given remarkably little help from the European Union. But I think it would be nice to think that European politicians could actually come together, recognize that this is a European problem and that a European solution is required. I'm not terribly optimistic about the near term, and certainly there is very little in the British debate which has that recognition that it isn't just all about us, and that in fact we are a relatively small part of the problem, that what's happening at Calais is actually pretty much of a sideshow to compare to what's happening in Sicily or what's happening on the Greek islands at the moment.
Jonathan Portes, Larry Macaulay, Stephen Wolfe, Dom Flynn, thank you for being part of this conversation here on the stream. It's not the first time we talk about migrants in Europe. I know it won't be the last time, but I thank you for the time you spent with us today. Take care, everybody.